obviously do an 8-7 split or something. Again, to have the 10-to-1 ratio on the DC trip, we're going to have a 10-to-1 ratio on anything else that we do with the kids.
It sounds to me the difference is you've offered an option this year for the kids that cannot or will not or cannot afford to go to Washington to have another trip, whereas before there wasn't that option. They came to school. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah,
No, they had plans for the kids at home. There was a
There
program.
was three options. There was the DC, there was the field trips, and then kids that couldn't go because of discipline or grade issues stayed here, and we had some academic work, and they.
Well, in the past, then, if there were options for field trips, who paid for them then? I mean, I don't think the school department did. So all of a sudden, why are we now suggesting that because there's going to be a full agenda of trips for $150, that all of a sudden the school department has to absorb the cost for that?
I don't think the cost of the field trips in the past were substantial. It was never brought up.
No, it was not. It was never. It was something less than $50.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're talking, so it's a matter of degree, whether it's $50 or $150. I mean,
Yeah, it's
you know,
right on the line.
again, I have no objection. I think it's a great plan that you have. I'm glad that you have the alternative program for the kids that
But
can't.
part of the alternative program is that, you know, we are considering, you know, shifting the paradigm a little bit in the next years to come, that we may be looking at alternative types of trips if the economic, you know, all these kind of things. So as we begin to explore alternatives to going to just DC, I think there are a number of educationally sound trips closer to home, perhaps not quite as complicated. So as we begin to explore those, that's why we decided this year we would kind of look at something much more structured so the kids actually have a choice, as opposed to, you know, we don't go to DC and we're left with really nothing at the end. So I really believe that we need to try to include
some aggressive fundraising to bring the cost down.
Yeah.
With Mr. Forche coming on as the principal, clearly one of the first questions that he had, actually during the interview process, I know it was brought up, are you going to continue the DC trip? And so he and I have been talking about this for at least a month, or right from the beginning actually. And he understands my standpoint on any such trip as this, and I make it very clear, and I'm glad that many of the answers to the questions that I put out every year are being addressed, whereas perhaps in the past they weren't addressed to the satisfaction that I wanted to see. Because I am concerned about the kids who aren't going, and I want to be sure whether it is an alternative set of field trips or whether it's that they're going to be here, that education is going on. One of the things that's a little bit different, and maybe John you can talk about it, is actually the schedule. Because as I look at this schedule, it's 5 days, and in the past it's always been that Monday right after graduation, then the kids would be back on that next Friday, and then on the following Monday they'd be doing some other kinds of end of the year activities and so forth. But I see this right now. It looks like you're coming back on June 19th, which is, if we don't have any snow days, which is always unlikely, that we'll be out on the last day of school would be the day after. So I think the last day is the 18th.
We're currently doing our best snow dance. No, what we're trying to do is, I clearly recognize that having the students go to Washington, D.C. or the alternative trip and come back and look at a full week of school. Otherwise, if you were left on June 9th, which was the original schedule, we have to really, as a school and as educators, we need to look at time on learning. We need to really look at, you know, where do we draw the line in the sands. I believe in this trip. It's celebratory. It's educationally sound. It's a great experience. But if we back it into the June 9th week or earlier, clearly coming back and having another week of school where it's very difficult to refocus students or to have structure that we really would like. So we pushed it on purpose to June 15th, and we'll see how the school calendar unfolds. Clearly we would know in April whether or not we would have any snow days. So we would have 2 months to look at the itinerary, and our plan would be at that point to scale back on the itinerary so that we could fit it within the last 4 days of the week. We're not trying to put any undue pressure on the superintendent, but you know, things that we think that um, you know, is a good chance that there might be one day where the schedule goes a little longer, but if not, we would adjust the calendar accordingly. So I think it's important that one of the changes that I proposed this year was to move it closer to the end of the year so that it's better time on learning. So the students would finish their school year basically during the week of June 9th. They would close out their grades and finish their responsibilities, and then they could go to Washington, D.C. or on the other trip, and they could really celebrate. So that's
I support the moving in time. I also share Mrs. Black's concern, but I guess I would approach it another way, in that I wouldn't recommend that the school department pay for the $150 cost, but I would want to have a third spelled out option at the school. Something definitive, you know, if your child does not participate in either of these, here's what the program will be. That's what I'd like to see. So that parents have a clear, you know, if you just want to send your child to school that week,
absolutely.
this is what the program will be that week.
We're in the business to offer educational opportunities, so we will absolutely offer significant educational opportunities to all our learners in grade 8 as these trips, DC trip or whatever goes off, absolutely.
Because I do think Mrs. Bach is right. You can't force people to spend money. So that's
Again, that was.
No, I
take
understand.
responsibility because they kind of, you know,
Right.
wrote up the script in the language that we use there, that we'll have the contract read trip. I apologize, that's really
okay.
not what my intention was there, so.
But I think even that's too bad, because that says that the kids that are staying back are gonna be in a classroom doing work, you know, and that's almost a penalty to some kids whose families aren't gonna be allowed to have them participate. I think the program that stays at home has to be given enough thought, that there are free things for the kids to do, and, you know, whatever is left over, maybe the PTA funds the $4,500 for those kids. You
Yeah.
know, maybe the school has to dig deeper, or maybe the fundraising first goes to that program. But unless I hear that by design, I can't support it, and I think we have to stop eroding public education. And this, to me, is where I draw the line. Classmates are going off to DC, everybody's gonna wanna go. And the alternative can't be a layered effect where some kids see, okay, I'm not with the kids that can afford this, I'm not with the kids that can afford this, but I'm with the kids that are doing extra paperwork in a library for 5 days. So,
I have some further concerns about along the same lines, and that is that there's going to be a huge amount of peer pressure and excitement pressure, if you will, to go on the trip. And that's going to put pressure back on the parents to pay for the trip. And in these days, sometimes that's going to be difficult. And as a result, you're going to end up by having the people at home suffering so the kid can go on the trip.
Don't we all do that all the time?
Yeah, we do that, Jerry, but, you know, and certainly it's happened in my house, but I think that's a serious concern in these troubled times. And there needs to be a way of dealing with that so that it isn't a disaster, personal disaster for the kid that he can't go because his family can't afford it. You got to be very, very sensitive on that. Can you really afford to go on this? And be ready to put the money in.
I guess you know, I was against the Florida trip for the high schoolers because I felt it had no educational value. This has a tremendous educational value, and we've done it for I don't know how many years, and I think it's proven. I mean, I've had one child, and I'll hopefully have a second child go on the trip, and
Maybe a third, you never know.
not planning on that. And I think it's a great trip, and I mean, I know we don't know if there have been kids who haven't gone because they can't afford it, because we try to provide the funds so they can go. I think we've done that in the past. And if we had a dozen kids, approximately a dozen or less, not make the trip last year, I guess I'm gonna support the trip because I feel it has the educational value. And we've gotten 119 out of the 133 that responded to the questionnaire that went out saying that they want their child to go. So that's a pretty large percentage. And then we had 9 who said they would go, but they would need some financial support. And I think we've always provided that support in the past. If you take the six PTA scholarships, and they're not full scholarships, you can break that into who knows how many parcels to support the children that really want to go. So
I think as a teacher, I just want to highlight the educational value to this trip. I mean, those museums are valuable. The kids are having fun, but they're also taking stuff in. There are teachers walking around with them. Going into the White House, there is certainly a value standing in front of that White House, especially this year. I mean, there's certainly a value standing in front of the Congress. There is certainly a value going to the Holocaust Museum. The kids have just finished reading Diary of Anne Frank, and putting a physical presence to this sort of emotional and historic catastrophe, I think is pretty profound on these kids. Looking at the story of Daniel, I think is pretty profound.
And ironically, for $700, these are kids that may be able to get an opportunity to see this, that they couldn't afford to go there with their parents, as the parents had to make the trip. So, I mean, that might be a cost out, it might be something they never have the opportunity to do. In fact, I bet you the majority of them might not have the opportunity.
Or even this year, I'm standing and we have illuminated tour, and the sunset in front of the Lincoln Memorial. I'm standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial with these kids, and knowing that Martin Luther King was there, and especially this year with President Obama inauguration. I mean, what is the emotional value of being there at that moment for these kids? I think it's profound.
And I think too, myself, Ms. Wise, and Mrs. Carmody, the 2 school psychologists are very sensitive to children's needs. That, in starting to work with all the students, we have a fairly good idea who may need some help. So if they didn't come forward, we certainly are very discreet about asking why they don't want to go, and working with students. So obviously, those students are going to go, at least unasked, in a very kind, courteous, discreet way to show them we want to go.
And Dave, could you tell me a little more about the contract, how you see that changing, and what will be the decision points? How will that take place? Because I know in the past there have been some decisions made at basically the 11th hour, and been huge disappointments. And so I just, and for those students who, because the school is making the decision that whether academically or behaviorally they're not capable of going, and they're not going to go probably on the in-school, what are we going to do, and what happens for the 5 days for those students, and how will you make that decision?
Well, I think as far as behavioral, I think we're trying to look at students who have a consistent record of behavior or discipline problems, not someone who perhaps makes one mistake and then has a good record for the rest of the year, which is what's happened in the past. So far this year, no one has a real consistent discipline issues that would preclude them from coming on the trip. Obviously, that we haven't signed the contract yet, so that once, if you approve it, we would go forward with that, and the clock would start ticking. As far as the grades, I think, do you want to do third term?
I think that once we begin to open this conversation with our students, who's the most important factor in this whole equation, we are going to present ourselves in a manner that is very supportive, very reasonable, and very fair, and very, very much open for conversation. And we'll do that with the parents. And there's not, in my mind, there's not a specific, if you get an F in your report card, you can't go. We're asking students to be academically responsible, behaviorally respectful, as we would expect throughout the course of the year, with nothing in particular that's going to say you now can't go, because part of this process is about education, and we're really going to make the learner part of the conversation, and we're going to help, support, talk, and review. So let's say at the end of each quarter, starting on January 25th, second quarter grades, we're going to have those conversations with kids, because that's what we do. Your grades need to come up. You need to start doing your homework. You need to be doing X, Y, and Z. not because you're gonna go to DC, but because